Oh, hey there. I wasn't expecting you for another few days. Nah, just kidding. So, you're interested in Buddhism and thought that a YouTube video hosted by someone as hairy as me could educate you. Well, I gotta say, that's pretty far out. I admire your curiosity, but here's the thing about Buddhism. It's kind of huge. Buddhism has been around for a very, very long time, okay? Both the story of the Buddha and his many teachings have each been interpreted in so many different ways that keeping track of all its countless branches, traditions, and schools is basically impossible. That's not even mentioning the fact that when Buddhism was introduced to the West around the 19th century, it was basically stripped of all its more spiritual and metaphysical aspects. Which is why these days, especially on the internet, Buddhism is often seen not as a religion or a spiritual practice, but instead as merely a self-improvement tool to help minimize stress. And while I'm certainly not anti-self-improvement, I think wanting to be a healthier and more fulfilled human being is a beautiful thing. Viewing Buddhism in this particular way is, in my opinion, kind of missing the point. But before delving into why, we first of all need to talk about what Buddhism is exactly, who founded it, what its teachings are, and what relevance they have in today's world. Remember, the story of the Buddha has fragmented over time into countless variations, each offering a unique perspective on his life and journey. What I'm about to discuss is just one of these many interpretations, but by no means should be considered the definitive story. No such thing exists. Siddhartha Gautama was born 2,500 years ago into a royal family in what is now part of modern-day Nepal. When Siddhartha was born, a sage predicted that he would become either a great emperor or a great spiritual teacher. The king, Siddhartha's father, being a practical and conservative man, did not want his son to wander the earth barefoot in search of spiritual enlightenment, but rather become a great emperor and ruler. So to ensure this happened, he kept the prince isolated in a beautiful palace with every imaginable luxury, surrounded by walls and shielded from the hardships and suffering of the outside world. The idea was that if Siddhartha grew up in luxury, surrounded by riches, treasures, and young healthy people, he would fall in love with life and therefore have no need to ever become a spiritual teacher. And for a time this worked. Siddhartha became enamored by the immediate pleasures of the senses: food, dance, poetry, love. And of course, he knew nothing about poverty, disease, death, or decay. For a time, young Siddhartha was comfortable, and his father, the king, believed his ploy had succeeded. However, human beings are a curious species, and eventually, Siddhartha began to question what was outside the palace walls, outside his perfectly constructed prison of seduction. At the age of 29, Siddhartha decided to sneak out of the palace with his servant, Channa, and what he saw shocked him. First, Siddhartha came across an old man. The prince had never met anyone like this before, and was stunned to see the physical deterioration that comes with old age. When he asked about this person, Channa replied that every living being grows old, and that no one can escape the inevitable process of aging. Next, Siddhartha saw a sick person. The prince was moved by the sight of someone suffering from illness, but Channa explained to him that all living beings are subject to disease and pain. This further troubled the mind of Siddhartha. The third sight was a dead body. As before, Channa explained to the prince that death is an inevitable part of life which everyone must go through. Seeing this dead body helped Siddhartha realize the impermanence of all things, and the importance of us all coming to terms with our own mortality. Finally, he came across a wandering ascetic, who is basically someone who abstains from your typical pleasures for a greater purpose. In the case of this ascetic, he had devoted himself to finding the cause of human suffering. This man gave Siddhartha hope, and piqued his curiosity. Perhaps true peace of mind came not from pleasure, but rather from the abstinence of pleasure. Perhaps what he had been taught all his life about happiness was in fact wrong. Siddhartha resolved to follow in the ascetic's footsteps. During the night, the prince snuck out of the city, abandoning his life of luxury to embark on a personal quest for spiritual enlightenment and the answers to life's most profound questions. Siddhartha spent the next 6 years pursuing various spiritual practices in hope of finding a way to end suffering and attain liberation. He studied with various teachers who taught him different meditation techniques and theories of existence. However, he was unsatisfied with their teachings, feeling that they did not provide a complete solution to the problem of suffering. He then practiced extreme asceticism, which involved living off a single grain of rice a day, holding his breath for extended periods, and exposing himself to extreme weather conditions. During this time, he was joined by 5 companions also practicing asceticism, who became his followers. Together, they believed that by subjecting themselves to extreme physical and mental hardships, they would be able to transcend the limitations of the body and mind and achieve enlightenment. However, one day while meditating under a Bodhi tree, Siddhartha reflected on his experiences and realized that the path of extreme asceticism was not leading him to enlightenment, and that complete deprivation is just as useless as indulgence. He came to understand that the human body requires sustenance, and that subjecting it to extreme physical and mental hardships is not the path to liberation, and therefore concluded that a middle path between indulgence and self-mortification was the right method to achieve spiritual liberation. In Buddhism, we call this the middle way. After realizing the middle way, Siddhartha left his 5 companions who were unconvinced by his revelation and walked to a nearby village, where he sat under a second Bodhi tree and began accepting offerings of rice milk and honey from a young woman. Siddhartha made a vow that he would not get up from that spot until he had attained enlightenment. After 49 days of intense meditation, he finally opened his eyes, having gained a deep understanding of the nature of reality and the causes of suffering. Yes, Siddhartha finally gained enlightenment, and from that moment on, he was known as the Buddha, which literally means awakened one. Eager to share his newfound understanding, the Buddha set out to find the 5 ascetics from whom he had parted ways, eventually finding them in a deer park. The 5 companions were initially skeptical, but the Buddha's presence and demeanor convinced them to listen to his words. The Buddha then gave his first sermon, in which he explained the 4 Noble Truths, which throughout the past 2,500 years have remained the cornerstone of Buddhist teaching. The first noble truth is called Dukkha, which you'll often see translated as life is just suffering and misery. But this isn't really what the Buddha meant, and it is this lazy, limited interpretation of the word which has led many people to regard Buddhism as inherently pessimistic. It certainly stands in great contrast to the picture I originally had of Buddhism, which was a religion of optimism, of joyful monks sat in the mountains laughing all day. But the truth is that Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. If anything, it is realistic. The Buddha did not try to convince people that life was perfect, nor did he attempt to scare or worry people with an endless list of imaginary fears, sins, and reasons to be depressed. No, the Buddha taught everyone the objective nature of our reality, which is essentially that everything in our lives, good or bad, is subject to impermanence and ultimately dissatisfaction. But why is this the case? Well, for that, we need to move on to the second noble truth, which is known as Samudaya. Samudaya, which can be translated as origin or cause, asserts that this dissatisfaction originates completely within our own minds. To quote George Harrison in Yellow Submarine, "It's all in the mind, you know." But seriously, the Buddha taught that the root cause of dukkha is the craving, desire, longing, and attachment which arises within ourselves. Think of this as the default setting of the human brain. We continually search for something outside ourselves to make us happy. And this craving, this thirst, is in Buddhism called Tanha, of which there are 3 types. Kama-Tanha is often seen as the most basic form of craving, as it revolves around the pursuit of sensual pleasures and the instant gratification they provide. Take eating a can of Pringles, for example. Each time you eat another Pringle, you get this small moment of pleasure, this microsecond of satisfaction. However, this sensation is temporary, it's fleeting, and the second you finish the Pringle, all you are left with is the desire for another one. Eventually you reach the bottom of the can, and realize that the pleasure you derived from eating the Pringles was temporary, and ultimately unsatisfying. In that moment, there is only one thing to do: crack open another can of Pringles. This endless cycle of craving extends beyond just junk food, however. It encompasses all 6 of our sense organs, them being the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And in the 21st century, these sensual pleasures are not only more accessible, but more normalized than ever before. Yes, this includes alcohol, pornography, social media, you know, the standard stuff, but I'm also referring to the more subtle desires we have, such as wealth and power. Sure, these things can provide a momentary thrill, a brief sense of satisfaction, but just like the taste of a Pringle, the feeling always fades, leaving behind only a desire for more. The second type of craving is called Bhava-Tanha, which is the desire for a fixed identity or existence outside of the present moment. Too often do we set our sights on the future, telling ourselves that once we get to a certain point in life, we will finally be happy, we will finally be able to relax. Whether it's getting that promotion, moving house, or finally getting that girlfriend or boyfriend, we are constantly chasing an idealized future for ourselves. However, once we attain these desired goals, we inevitably just set new benchmarks for fulfillment. It's this constant cycle of, I just need to get to this point in my life, and then I will finally be happy forever and ever. Like I've already said, wanting to grow and become a healthier, stronger, and kinder human being is a wonderful thing. What we don't want, however, is to become so attached to this endless loop that we spend our lives chasing an elusive future which is always just out of reach, in the process losing sight of the present moment and the impermanence of all things. And speaking of impermanence, I think it's time to address something I've been putting off in this video because it's kind of awkward. But basically, according to Buddhism, you don't even really exist, at least not in the way you think. But on the plus side, neither do I, so at least we can experience this together. This Buddhist doctrine of a non-self is known as Anatta, and I think the best way to understand this concept is to imagine the self as a flowing river. From a distance, the river appears constant and unchanging. The river has a distinct identity, name, and history. However, upon closer examination, we see that the river is made up of constantly changing water molecules. Each moment, new water flows in while the old water flows out, giving the appearance of continuity but lacking a fixed essence. The Buddha taught that the self is kind of like a river, constantly flowing and changing. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences arise and pass away, shaping our sense of identity at any given moment. Just as the river is not the same from one moment to the next, the self is not a fixed entity but a dynamic process of becoming. Understanding non-self is recognizing that there is no permanent, unchanging essence or self behind our experiences. There is only the ever-changing flow of emotions, thoughts, and memories, devoid of a separate and enduring identity. This realization can help us to let go of attachment to a fixed sense of self, and find freedom in embracing the impermanent nature of our existence. And this links nicely into our final type of craving, Vibhava-Tanha, which is the desire to deny this impermanence, the craving to avoid pain, suffering, and the challenges of life altogether. This usually manifests in thoughts of self-destruction, suicide, and the belief that this will bring an end to our suffering. However, according to Buddhism, this assumption is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the self. The Buddha taught that it is basically the human condition to be caught in this endless cycle of desire, attachment, and dissatisfaction, which in Buddhism is called Samsara. Think of this like the infinite loop of unsatisfying Pringle eating, except on a much bigger scale. According to Buddhism, we are all stuck in this endless cycle of Samsara, living, suffering, dying, and being reborn, over and over and over again, But if there is no inherent, unchanging soul or self, what is it exactly that travels through this wheel of rebirth? Well, according to Buddhism, it is the storehouse of consciousness that is within every one of us. Yeah, the Buddha taught that we're basically all just slices of consciousness which have manifested into a body for a short period of time, which is why you'll often hear people saying, "We are all one, bro." So, let's recap. The Buddha, much like a doctor, has diagnosed all of us with the disease of Dukkha, and has identified its causes. The third Buddhist noble truth, called Nirodha, offers the hope of a cure to this endless cycle of suffering and impermanence. And here's the part that I find beautiful. As we are the ultimate cause of all our dukkha, we are also the ultimate solution. Isn't that amazing? The Buddha taught that by extinguishing our craving and attachment, by recognizing the impermanent nature of our desires, we can free ourselves from the chains of suffering and attain Nirvana. Now, the exact definition of Nirvana is one of those things which varies among different schools of Buddhism. But if I could attempt to sum it up very briefly, it is the ultimate goal of the Buddhist path, a state of profound peace, freedom, and enlightenment. It is only when one achieves Nirvana that one is liberated from the cycle of Samsara. The fourth and final noble truth is known as Magga, and is the Buddha's method of achieving happiness, virtue, and eventually Nirvana. To put it simply, if the first three noble truths were the what, then the fourth noble truth is the how. But Buddhism has no interest in you simply believing in this doctrine. Instead, it emphasizes you walking the path to enlightenment yourself. It's one of my favorite things about the Buddha. He asks us all not to blindly believe in what he says, nor anyone else for that matter, but instead that any view or belief should be tested by the individual. The path is 8 broad areas of practice that touch every part of our lives, and we call this the Noble Eightfold Path. You may have seen a wheel like this before. Each spoke on the wheel represents a different area of practice. They are not to be mastered one at a time, but practiced simultaneously, as each aspect of the path supports and reinforces each other aspect. In the English language, the Eightfold Path is often presented as a list of things which are right. For example, right action, right effort, right concentration, and so on. To your 21st century ears, this may sound a little oppressive. However, this is just a case of a word being slightly lost in translation, and you should think of it more as meaning wise or wholesome. These 8 areas of practice aim at promoting and perfecting the 3 essentials of Buddhist training, namely ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. Ethical conduct includes 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, being right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Right speech emphasizes the importance of communicating in a way that promotes harmony and understanding, while being truthful and free of hatred. This means avoiding harmful speech, such as lying and gossip, or using harsh and abusive language. However, this doesn't mean that one should always try to say pleasant things and avoid difficult conversations. Sometimes it is necessary to speak truthfully about difficult topics. Other times it is better to say nothing at all. However, it should all be done in a way that respects the dignity and feelings of others. Ultimately, right speech is about using language to bring people together and create a more peaceful and compassionate world. Right action aims at promoting peaceful and morally sound conduct. This includes refraining from actions such as killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. However, right action is not just concerned with avoiding negative behaviors, but also with actively engaging in positive ones. This includes acts of generosity, kindness, and compassion. Right livelihood is about earning a living in a way that is ethical and does not cause harm to others. This means avoiding trades or professions that involve killing, stealing, or any other form of exploitation. Although in the 21st century this can be hard. It also means being honest and fair in business dealings and not taking advantage of others for personal gain. Right livelihood involves taking responsibility for the consequences of one's actions and recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings. It is about finding a way to make a living that is in line with one's values and contributes positively to the world. These 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, which make up Buddhist ethical conduct, aim at promoting a happy and harmonious life for both ourselves and others, and is considered the indispensable foundation for all higher spiritual attainments. Mental discipline also includes 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, being right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right effort is one of my personal favorites. It is concerned with maintaining positive mental states and preventing negative ones from arising. The key to right effort is to recognize that we have the power to influence our own minds. By making a concerted effort to direct our thoughts and actions in positive directions, we can gradually develop greater mental clarity, peace, and wisdom. Right mindfulness involves being fully present and aware of what is happening in the present moment, without judgment or distraction. This involves paying attention to one's thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations. Right concentration is the practice of cultivating a focused, one-pointed mind, and this can be done through meditation. Meditation practice is a key aspect of developing both right concentration and right mindfulness, as it nurtures the ability to observe and focus the mind. Through regular meditation practice, one can train the mind to be more attentive, calm, and focused, which can lead to a greater insight and understanding. The remaining two factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, being right intention and right understanding, go on to constitute wisdom. Right intention, sometimes called right thought, is the unselfish desire to become enlightened, to let go of our earthly attachments and to cultivate thoughts of love and non-violence. It is the commitment one needs to be fully engaged in Buddhist practice. And finally, right understanding, sometimes called right view, is the understanding of things as they really are, specifically the Four Noble Truths. It is not about blindly believing in a doctrine that a book or some guy sat by a tree on the internet has told you, but about independently perceiving the true nature of yourself and the world around you. The Noble Eightfold Path offers a holistic approach to living a meaningful life, one that is grounded in ethics, discipline, and wisdom. The Buddha taught that by following the Eightfold Path, one can cultivate a deeper understanding of the true nature of reality and ultimately attain the goal of Nirvana. However, in a shocking turn of events, the Buddha also warned us to not get too attached to these teachings, and he did this by recounting the parable of the raft. Here's how the story goes. A man is trapped on one side of a fast-flowing river. Where he stands, there is great danger and uncertainty, but if he could just get to the other side, he would be safe. Unfortunately, there is no bridge to cross, so the man gathers logs, twigs, and vines, and fashions a raft, sturdy enough to carry him to the other side. Once he makes the crossing, the man is safe. There are no more rivers to cross. However, the raft was so helpful to the man that he decides to drag it along with him for the rest of his journey. It's a funny story, but it actually holds a really valuable message. See, the Buddha taught that his own teachings are similar to the raft. Sure, they are an essential tool to help us cross the turbulent river of ignorance and suffering. But what they are not is something to cling on to. The Buddha believed that spirituality should be practical, and emphasized that his teachings are not absolute truths to be dogmatically followed, but guides to help us reach enlightenment, to reach the other side of the river. So of course, use the Buddha's truths as a raft to carry you through troubled times, to help find your way to safety and blessing. But don't continue to carry the raft around with you, don't worship the raft, don't argue with others that your raft is better than theirs. It is a means to an end, not the destination itself. Anyway, after hearing the Buddha's first sermon on the Middle Way, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path, the 5 ascetics were deeply moved. They became the first followers of the Buddha and the first members of the Sangha, the community of Buddhist monks and nuns. Over the next 45 years, the Buddha continued to travel and teach. He taught all classes of men and women, from kings and monks to beggars and criminals, making not the slightest distinction between them. Over these decades, he established a large and devoted following, and eventually passed away at the age of 80. However, his teachings, known collectively as the Dharma, continued to spread and evolve, becoming one of the world's major religions and influencing countless individuals throughout history, including the guy talking to you right now. I've tried to keep this video pretty objective and impersonal, but if I could just speak from the heart for a second, I wasn't always the happy, peaceful tree lover who now sits before you. In fact, for a long time, I was pretty down bad, constantly attaching my happiness to the external, constantly waiting for things to be different, for something or someone to come along and save me. And to tell you the truth, it was only when I started reading about Buddhism that I began to realize that true change, true happiness, true fulfillment, it has to come from within. It just has to. If there's one thing you take away from this video, please let it be that. I guess the reason I find Siddhartha Gautama's story so inspiring is because he was a guy who seemingly had everything one could ever want. Yet deep down he knew that something wasn't quite right. He realized that there was more to life than just the reality and lessons that he himself had experienced, and that deep change was needed in order to figure it all out. See, it was curiosity which drove Siddhartha outside those palace walls, just as it was curiosity which drove me to start learning about Buddhism, which drove you to click on this video and make it 25 minutes in. Wow. Nice attention span, by the way. All I can hope now is that you apply some of these lessons to your own life, to help you understand and overcome the root causes of your suffering and find peace. It is possible for everyone, including you. Don't think that it's not, because it is. And that, my friends, is my attempt at briefly explaining Buddhism to you. However, before we leave, what I thought I'd really quickly do is answer a few frequently asked questions and address a couple more things, which I would just feel wrong completely leaving out of this video. So cue the, quickfire Buddhism lightning round. The fat, happy, laughing Buddha who you'll often see statues of is in fact not Siddhartha Gautama, but a wandering monk from 10th century China named Budai. Fun fact, some Buddhists believe Budai to be an incarnation of Maitreya, who is prophesied to become the next Buddha once the teachings of Gautama Buddha have been disregarded or largely forgotten. My answer would be to call it what you want. Religion, philosophy, both, neither. It's just a matter of semantics and doesn't change what Buddhism is. I will tell you that pretty much all Buddhists in East Asia call it a religion. However, if you really want a detailed answer to this question, I would recommend this article from Buddhist author Alan Peto, where he goes in depth as to why this question is so frequently asked by Westerners. It's pretty interesting, the link is in the description. So, like I mentioned at the start, Buddhism has numerous schools and branches that have developed over time due to cultural, historical, and geographical influences. These vary greatly in their teachings, practices, and interpretations of Buddhist philosophy, which is why it can be kind of difficult to summarize Buddhism in a video like this. But broadly speaking, Buddhism can be divided into three main branches, being Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Theravada, which means School of the Elders, is the oldest form of Buddhism, and is primarily practiced in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. It focuses on the teachings found in the Pali Canon, a collection of scriptures which are based on oral teachings dating back almost to the time of the Buddha himself. Theravada is more human-centered and less ritualistic than Mahayana and Vajrayana, emphasizing individual enlightenment through personal effort, self-discipline, and the monastic life. It is considered the most orthodox branch of Buddhism and pretty much believes that one must become a monk in order to attain Nirvana. Mahayana, which means great vehicle, is newer than Theravada and is primarily practiced in China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Mahayana Buddhism includes a variety of schools such as Pure Land, Zen, and Nichiren Buddhism. It focuses on the Mahayana Sutras, expansive scriptures which elaborate on the Pali Canon, and which Mahayana Buddhists believe to be the most complete teachings of the Buddha. Mahayana is considered to be more accessible than Theravada, teaching that enlightenment is attainable for everyone, regardless of whether they are a monk or not. Mahayana Buddhism is characterized by its greater emphasis on ritualistic practices compared to Theravada, while also placing significant importance on the Bodhisattva bodhisattva, individuals who have achieved enlightenment but who have decided to stay in the cycle of samsara in order to help others attain nirvana. Vajrayana, which means diamond vehicle, is a form of Buddhism that evolved from Mahayana and is primarily practiced in Tibet, Bhutan, Mongolia, and other Himalayan regions. Tibetan Buddhism, a significant tradition within Vajrayana, is known for its rich ritual practices, colourful iconography, and complex tantric techniques aimed at achieving enlightenment in a single lifetime. It places great importance on lamas, or spiritual teachers, who guide practitioners on the path to enlightenment, the most famous of which is the Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. Again, different schools of Buddhism have different views on this, so to give an apologetically vague answer, some Buddhists are vegetarian and some Buddhists are not. Vegetarianism is not required to follow the Buddhist path as a layperson, which is someone who is a Buddhist but not a monk, although most monasteries do generally adhere to a strictly vegetarian diet. Me, personally, I don't eat meat. Honestly, just give me rice, beans, greens, tofu, and fruit every day for the rest of my life, and I'll be happy. Especially mangoes. I like mangoes. The Buddha was a man who focused on human suffering and the path to liberation from it, and therefore saw no real reason to discuss the existence or nature of a creator god. Yes, while most branches of Buddhism do incorporate gods within their cosmology, these are gods with a small g, and are generally seen as being subject to the same laws of existence as humans, such as samsara and rebirth, rather than omnipotent creators. On top of this, the idea of a creator god seriously conflicts with the universal Buddhist belief of dependent origination, which basically states that all phenomena are interconnected and arise independent of other things, which, speaking of. Karma is something which is often misrepresented in popular culture, especially in the West. What karma is not, according to the Buddha, is some sort of punishment and reward system, controlled by an external force. Instead, I'd think of it more as simply cause and effect, a natural law of the universe similar to gravity. When you perform an action, that action has consequences, and will lead to either suffering or the cessation of suffering. Another way of putting it is to imagine your reality as a swimming pool. By filling the pool with skillful, wholesome karma, you get to swim in slightly clearer water. However, fill the pool with unskillful, unwholesome karma, and you have to swim in the filth you've contributed to. Buddhists also believe karma to influence the cycle of rebirth, which includes 6 planes of existence, 3 unfortunate realms and 3 fortunate realms. Beings with negative karma are reborn into the unfortunate realms of animals, ghosts, or hell, where they face immense suffering. Those with positive karma are reborn into the fortunate realms of demigods, gods, or humans. While demigods and gods experience pleasures beyond human understanding, they also endure constant jealousy and conflict. The human realm, though lacking the luxuries of the divine realms, is free from their endless strife and is considered the highest realm of rebirth. This is because the human realm uniquely offers the chance to achieve enlightenment, or nirvana, a rare and valuable opportunity in the vast cycle of rebirths. This chance for spiritual awakening makes human life especially precious in Buddhist belief, which, I don't know, makes me feel grateful to be alive. So if you've made it to the end of this video, I'm going to guess that you're pretty interested in Buddhism. However, what I'd like to do now, since this video was only really an introduction, is recommend a few more resources that can offer a more in-depth exploration into this beautiful religion, starting with books. My 2 recommendations for beginners would be What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula and The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh. In fact, I'd say anything by Thich Nhat Hanh is a pretty safe bet. I've recently been reading Old Path White Clouds, which offers a really detailed account of the Buddha's life, and it's been a great read so far, very relaxing stuff. There is also, of course, many great online resources, YouTube being one, the Buddhist subreddit being another, which has a huge frequently asked questions page, a huge book list, as well as so many links to basically everything Buddhism online. However, at the end of the day, at least in my experience, nothing beats finding a real-life, in-person community or sangha or teacher to help further your practice. I have left a link to an amazing website website in the description, where you can type in your address and it will literally show you what sanghas are closest to you. And that's gonna be it for this video. Much respect for making it to the end. I hope that you were able to take something away from this video, and I will just leave you with this quote from the Buddha himself. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. And as always, be kind, be strong, be curious.